Hello everyone, you are on the channel Through the Ages with Max. This video is about tanks of World War II. World War II, which began in 1939, was one of the largest conflicts in human history. It resulted in huge losses and major changes in the world order. Armored vehicles, in particular tanks, played an important role in this war, becoming a symbol of the mobility and power of the army. Tanks, as an integral part of the armed forces, began to be actively used in combat immediately after their introduction in the early 20th century. However, it was during World War II that tanks reached their most effective form. A wide variety of models were encountered on the battlefield, each with its own characteristics and purpose. Early years of the conflict. With the outbreak of the war, Germany introduced tank tactics known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This involved combining a rapid attack by tanks with the support of aircraft and motorized units. Tank models such as the Panzer III and Panzer IV became the basis for this tactic. Their speed and maneuverability allowed the Germans to quickly advance through enemy territory, which led to successful campaigns in France and on the Eastern Front. In response to Germany's aggressive actions, other countries began actively developing their own tanks. The USSR, for example, produced the famous T-34. This tank became one of the most widespread and effective combat vehicles of World War II. The main characteristics of the T-34, powerful armor, great firepower, and high mobility, made it a real war horse for the Soviet Union. Turning point 1943 was the turning point of the war. One of the largest tank battles in history took place on the Kursk Bulge. The Soviets applied new tactics and prepared for the German attack, using the advantages of their T-34 tank. In this battle, for the first time in the history of military affairs, more than 6,000 tanks were used on both sides. The Battle of Kursk was not only a significant victory for the Soviet Union, but also a turning point in the course of the entire war. With each battle, the experience of tank troops grew. For example, in the Battle of Prokhorovka, where thousands of tanks and soldiers fell victim, both sides understood the importance of armored vehicles on the battlefield. The Germans actively used the Tiger I, a tank with a high level of protection and firepower, but its limited mobility was a revelation to the command. Tanks on other fronts. Tanks played an equally important role on other fronts. In North Africa, the British and Italian troops also used various models. Perhaps the most famous tank of that period was the Matilda II, which had good protection and fairly powerful weapons. This tank demonstrated its effectiveness in the African theater, although it could not compare with more modern German models. It is important to note that tanks were also necessary in the Pacific. Although the history of this war was not as associated with tanks as in the European theater, even here armored vehicles had an impact on the outcome of a number of battles. The American Sherman and Japanese Type 97 Chiha were used on various islands. By the time the war ended in 1945, tanks had changed significantly. As armored vehicles developed, so did their tactics. The countries that emerged victorious began to analyze the experience of using tanks and adapt their military strategies accordingly. Tanks became more protected, their firepower increased, and their mobility improved. However, World War II also showed the vulnerability of tanks to new types of anti-tank weapons. Systems such as rifles and grenade launchers, which were outdated in their concepts, were supplemented by anti-tank missiles and aircraft, which changed the approach to tank battles. History lessons. The legacy of World War II tanks remains relevant today. The lessons gained in those battles are still studied by military personnel and historians. The successful use of armored vehicles, as well as the mistakes made during the war, serve as important lessons for future generations. Ultimately, the tanks of World War II became not only a tool of war, but also a symbol of industrial progress and intense confrontation on the battlefield. The war showed how technology can influence the course of history and left a legacy of many lessons for future conflicts. Armored vehicles, having developed and evolved in response to new challenges, remain an important element of the armed forces even in the 21st century, and the memory of the tanks of World War II will live in the hearts of those who study this tragic but important page in human history.